I hired her to clean my floors, not to touch my children. But when I opened the security app on my phone at 3 in the morning, I saw her standing over my paralyzed triplets, holding a 6-inch silver needle. I thought I was watching a murder in real time. I was wrong. I was watching something much more dangerous, something that would tear my family apart before putting it back together. If you think you know who the villain is in this story, think again. It was 3 in the morning in San Francisco but noon in Tokyo. I am Julian Thorne, and my life is measured in billions of dollars and 3 tragedies, my triplets, Noah, Liam, and Ethan. 2 years ago, a mysterious accident took my wife and left my sons paralyzed from the waist down. Since then, my mansion in Pacific Heights has been a fortress guarded by sensors, cameras, and a rotation of highly paid nurses who did exactly what they were told. I was sitting in a boardroom overlooking the Tokyo skyline, listening to a merger proposal worth $500 million. But my eyes were glued to the tablet on the conference table. The live feed from the nursery back home. It was my obsession, my torment checking on them when I could not be there. The room on the screen was dark, lit only by the soft green glow of the medical monitors. Then the door creaked open. It was Imani Lewis, the new maid. She had been with us for 2 weeks, quiet, efficient, invisible. Exactly how I liked my staff. She was a black woman with eyes that always seemed to be analyzing everything, but she kept her head down, she scrubbed the marble until it shined, and she never spoke unless spoken to. But tonight she was not cleaning, she was creeping toward the beds like a shadow moving with a purpose that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She stopped beside Noah, my eldest, by 2 minutes. She looked at the door, then back at the boy. She reached into her apron pocket. I zoomed in on the screen. The pixelated image sharpened in the low light. She pulled out a long, thin silver object. It glinted in the monitor light. A needle. It looked like a weapon. My blood ran cold. She lifted the blanket, exposing Noah's withered legs. Legs, the best doctors in the world said, would never move again. She raised the needle high, poised to strike. "Stop!" I screamed, slamming my fist onto the mahogany conference table. The room went dead silent. 12. Japanese executives stared at me in shock, their papers freezing in mid-air. I did not care. I grabbed my phone and dialed the private security line for my estate. My hands were shaking with a rage I had not felt since the accident. "Pick up. Pick up." "Damn it!" the head of security answered, voice groggy. "Sir, get to the nursery now," I roared into the phone. "The maid. She has a weapon, she is hurting them. Break down the door if you have to, do not let her touch them. Kill the feed. If you have to, just stop her." I watched on the screen. Helpless, thousands of miles away. The security team was running. I could see their body cam feeds activating on my secondary monitor, but they were too slow on the nursery screen. Imani did not hesitate. She drove the silver needle straight into my son's thigh. Noah's body jerked a violent spasm, a reflex, or a silent scream of agony. I felt like I had been shot. My heart stopped as I watched the feed cut to black as the security team burst into the room, weapons drawn, screaming for her to get on the ground. 12 hours later, the tires of my Maybach screeched against the pavement of the estate driveway. I had flown across the Pacific in a cold sweat. Staring at the frozen image on my phone, the security feed had cut out right after the team breached the room, and the silence since then had been deafening. I burst through the front doors, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Get out of my way!" I shouted at the staff who were huddled in the foyer, looking terrified. They scrambled aside, eyes wide as I sprinted up the marble staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time, the sound of shouting coming from the west. Wing guided me toward the nursery. I reached the door and it was already splintered off its hinges, the wood jagged and broken where the security team had rammed it open. The air inside smelled of rubbing alcohol and fear. 2 of my largest guards had their weapons drawn, but they were hesitating, unsure of how to handle the woman in the center of the room who was refusing to back down. It was a chaotic tableau that made no sense. Imani was on her knees beside Noah's bed. She was drenched in sweat, her uniform clinging to her back. Her hair, which was usually pulled back in a neat bun, was wild in loose strands sticking to her forehead. She was not cowering. She was not surrendering. She had one hand clamped around Noah's ankle with a grip that looked painful, and in the other she still held that terrifying silver instrument. She was pressing it deep into the muscle of his calf, ignoring the guards screaming at her to drop it. She was murmuring something under her breath, a rhythmic chant of focus and desperation. My eyes snapped to my son. Noah was making a sound I had not heard in years, a low, guttural groan. His face was twisted in a grimace, his teeth gritted, and his eyes were squeezed shut. It looked like pure agony. She was torturing him right in front of my security team. "Stop it!" I roared, lunging forward. "Let him go! You are hurting him!" Before I could reach her, a blur of white silk flew past me. It was Camilla, my wife. She threw herself between me and the bed, her face a mask of perfectly curated horror. "Oh my God, Julian!" she screamed, her voice shrill and piercing. "Look at what she is doing. She is stabbing him. She is stabbing our baby. I told you she was crazy. I told you she was dangerous. Look at the needle." Camilla grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my suit jacket, pulling me back as if to protect me from the maid. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Imani, who was still holding Noah's leg, despite the guards now grabbing her shoulders. "Get her away, Julian. Do something. She is going to kill him. She is a psycho who gets off on their pain. I tried to warn you." The room spun. The security guards finally moved in, grabbing Imani by the arms and yanking her back violently. She did not scream. She did not fight them physically. She just kept her eyes locked on Noah's leg, breathless and intense, as if she was waiting for something that no one else could see. "Get her out of here!" Camilla shrieked, collapsing onto the floor in a theatrical heap of sobbing silk. "Get this monster away from my children! Get off her, but keep her down!" I commanded, watching as the two burly security guards pressed Imani into the plush carpet of the nursery floor. She let out a sharp gasp as her cheek hit the ground, but she did not scream. She did not beg for mercy. She just lay there breathing hard, her eyes wide and defiant, staring up at me from the floorboards. I snatched the silver needle from her grip, my fingers trembling with a mix of adrenaline and fury. I held the sharp metal tip inches from her face, forcing her to look at the instrument she had dared to use on my son. "Look at this!" I shouted, my voice raw and shaking. "You brought a weapon into my children's bedroom. Who do you think you are? I pay you to scrub toilets and change sheets. I pay you to take out the trash, not to play amateur surgeon on my paralyzed son. You are nothing but help. Do you understand that you are the help? You clean the messes. You do not touch the children, ever." Imani did not flinch. Her chest heaved against the floor, but her voice was eerily calm, for someone with a knee in her back. "His legs were cold, sir," she rasped, spitting a strand of hair out of her mouth. "Listen to me. His circulation is failing. I was not hurting him. I was stimulating the nerve endings. I was trying to wake them up, because no one else in this house bothers to check if they are freezing under these expensive blankets." "Nerve endings," I scoffed, standing up and tossing the needle onto the nightstand like it was contaminated evidence. "Do not insult my intelligence. You are a maid, not a neurologist. My sons have the best medical care money can buy. Dr. Vance is a world-renowned specialist, and he told us 2 years ago that those nerves are dead. There is nothing to wake up. You are just a sadist who wanted to see if they could still feel pain." Before I could say another word, the sound of a slap cracked through the room, sharp and violent. Camilla had lunged forward, her hand connecting hard with Imani's, face snapping, her head to the side. "Shut up, you lying witch!" Camilla shrieked, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you speak about Dr. Vance? He saved their lives while you were probably in jail, or wherever people like you come from. He told us they are paralyzed, completely paralyzed. You just want to give false hope so you can torture them some more." Imani slowly turned her face back toward us, a red mark blooming on her dark skin. She looked at Camilla, not with fear, but with a pity that seemed to enrage my wife even more. "You can hit me all you want," Imani said quietly, her voice cutting through the hysteria. "But that does not change the fact that Noah flinched. You saw it, Julian. I know you saw it. Dead. Nerves do not flinch." Camilla let out a strangled noise of fury and raised her hand. Again. "Get her out of here, Julian," she screamed. "Get this filth out of our house before I kill her myself." Camilla was not finished. She scrambled to her feet, her silk robe rustling like a snake shedding its skin, and rushed over to the small cot in the corner of the nursery, where Imani sometimes rested during long shifts. "I knew it," she hissed, tearing the pillow off the bed and throwing it across the room. "I knew there was something wrong with her." She reached into the folds of the sheets and pulled out a small amber bottle, holding it up to the light, like a twisted trophy. "Look at this. Julian, look at what I found hidden in her bed." My eyes focused on the bottle in her manicured hand. It was not a standard prescription bottle. It was unlabeled, filled with a dark, viscous liquid. "What is that?" I demanded, my voice low and dangerous, feeling the ground beneath me start to crumble. "It is sedatives, Julian." Camilla cried, unscrewing the cap and sniffing it before recoiling with a dramatic gag. "Strong ones. Illegal ones. This is why the boys have been so lethargic lately. This is why they never wake up when I come in to check on them. She has been drugging them. She has been knocking them out so she can practice her sick little experiments on them without them screaming for help. Oh my God, she is a monster." The world tilted on its axis. I looked at Imani. She was still pinned to the floor by the guards, her cheek pressed against the carpet, but she lifted her head to look at the bottle. Her expression was not guilt. It was shock, followed immediately by a cold, dawning realization. "I have never seen that bottle in my life," she said, her voice steady, despite the heavy hand of the guard on her shoulder. "She put it there, Julian. You have to know that she planted it, liar." Camilla shrieked, throwing the bottle at my feet. It bounced on the rug, rolling to a stop near my shoe. "Why would I drug my own children? You are the one with the needle. You are the one with the fake background. I bet you are not even a real maid who sent you. Was it a competitor? Did someone pay you to hurt my family?" I stared at the bottle, then at Imani. The evidence was right there, the needle in her hand, the drugs in her bed, the pain on Noah's face. It was too much. The last shred of doubt, the tiny voice that wondered if maybe she was trying to help, was crushed under the weight of that amber bottle. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, turning my heart to stone. I had let a monster into my home. I had let her near the most precious things I had left. "Get her up," I said to the guards, my voice dead flat. "Get her out of my house right now." They hauled Imani to her feet. She did not struggle. She stood tall, smoothing her apron, looking at me with eyes that burned with an intensity I could not place. "Julian, please," she said. "Check the cameras. Check the timestamps. I did not put that there. Check the fingerprints." I said, "Get her out," I roared, losing control. I pointed a finger at her face, shaking with the force of my anger. "You are done. Do you hear me? You are finished. You are lucky I do not break your neck right here. If I ever see your face on my property again, if you ever come near my sons, I will not just call the police. I will end you. I will use every dollar I have to make sure you rot in a cell so deep they will have to pump air down to you. Do you understand me? Get out." Camilla sobbed into her hands, peeking through her fingers to watch the guards drag Imani toward the door. Imani did not look back at her. She looked at me, one last long look, before she was shoved into the hallway, leaving me alone with a weeping wife, a terrified child, and a bottle of poison on the floor. The rain came down in sheets, a relentless deluge that soaked through Imani's thin uniform in seconds. The security guards dragged her down the long gravel driveway, their grips bruising her arms. They did not care that she was barefoot. They did not care that she was shivering. They only cared about removing the threat. They threw her onto the wet pavement outside the massive iron gates, like she was nothing more than garbage. She stumbled, scraping her knees, but she did not stay down. She scrambled to her feet, wiping rain and mud from her face, and turned back toward the looming mansion that looked more like a fortress than a home. I stood on the porch under the awning, safe and dry, watching her through the sheets of rain. Camilla was clinging to my arm, sobbing into my shoulder. But I could not take my eyes off the woman at the gate. She looked small against the iron bars, but her voice cut through the storm, sharp and desperate. "Julian," she screamed over the thunder, lightning flashing behind her, illuminating her face in a stark white burst. "Listen to me for once in your life. Listen. You think you are so smart, you think you are a genius because you built an empire of code and silicon. But you are blind. You are the blindest man I have ever met. You see data, but you do not see the truth right in front of you." I stiffened my hand, tightening into a fist. "Get out of here!" I shouted back, my voice barely carrying over the wind. "Go before I call the cops." Imani gripped the iron bars, her knuckles white. She did not leave. She leaned in, pressing her face against the cold metal, shouting with a fury that made me flinch. "Check the trash. Julian. Check her trash. Not the main bin, not the one the staff empties. Check the one in her private bathroom, the one she thinks no one looks at. You will find the truth there." Camilla gasped beside me, her grip on my arm turning painful. "Do not listen to her. Julian, she is insane. She is just trying to hurt us more. Just close the gate. Close it now." Imani was not done. She was screaming now, her voice cracking with the effort. "Those boys did not have an accident. They were not just unlucky, they are being shut down, Julian, like machines. They are being turned off one by one, and you are letting it happen. You are letting her do it, because you are too afraid to look, too afraid to see what is really happening in your own house. Wake up before there is nothing left to wake up." I stared at her, the rain plastering her hair to her skull, her eyes burning with a terrifying conviction. She did not look like a criminal. She looked like a prophet, shouting doom from the wilderness. But then the heavy iron gates began to swing shut, driven by the automatic motors. The metal clanged with a sound like a prison door slamming shut, cutting off her voice, cutting off her face, leaving me standing in the silence of my porch with only the sound of the rain and the frantic beating of my own heart. Camilla buried her face in my chest, shaking violently. "Thank God she is gone," she whispered. "Thank God she cannot hurt them anymore." I put my arm around my wife, comforting her automatically, but my eyes were still fixed on the closed gate, the echo of Imani's words bouncing around my skull. "Check the trash," she had said. Check the trash. Why would a maid know what was in my wife's private trash, and why did the thought of it make a cold knot of dread form in the pit of my stomach? I looked down at Camilla, who was trembling but dry, and then I looked back at the gate, where Imani was now walking away alone into the storm, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger. It was fear, cold and sharp, and it had nothing to do with the woman outside the gate, and everything to do with the woman in my arms. I walked back into the house, the silence heavy and suffocating. Camilla was still clinging to me, her sobs racking her body like she was the one who had been attacked. She kept murmuring about safety, about how we needed new guards, better locks, maybe even a private investigator to make sure Imani never came back. She was shaking her tears soaking into my shirt, but for the first time, her distress felt performative, a little too loud, a little too desperate. I tried to push the thought away, telling myself she was just a terrified mother protecting her stepchildren. But the doubt was there, a tiny splinter in my mind that I could not ignore. We went back upstairs to the nursery. The guards had already left to secure the perimeter, but the room still felt charged with the energy of the confrontation. The air smelled of fear and antiseptic. Noah was lying still in his bed, his face pale, his breathing shallow. I walked over to him, my heart aching, He looked so small, so fragile under the heavy duvet. I reached out to smooth his hair, whispering a soft apology for the chaos, for the pain, for everything. Then my eyes drifted down to his legs, the legs that had been lifeless for 2 years, the legs that Dr. Vance had said would never move again. The blanket was still thrown back from where Imani had exposed them, and there on his right thigh was a small red mark, a tiny pinprick where the silver needle had gone in. It was just a speck of blood already clotting, but it drew my gaze like a magnet. I reached out my hand, trembling slightly, and touched his skin right around the mark. I expected it to be cold. Marble, cold, dead, cold, the way it always was, the way Dr. Vance said it would always be, due to the lack of circulation and nerve activity. But it wasn't. It was warm. Not hot, not feverish, but warm. Like life. Like blood was flowing. Like muscles were reacting. Like nerves were firing somewhere deep inside. I froze my fingers, resting on that small patch of skin. Warmth. Warmth meant blood flow. Warmth meant reaction. Warmth meant life. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at Noah's face. He was asleep, but his expression was not one of pain anymore. It was peaceful, relaxed, almost as if the tension had left his body with the needle. "Julian, what are you doing?" Camilla asked from the doorway, her voice sharp with something that sounded like panic. "Leave him alone. He needs to rest, Dr. Vance said. Too much. Stimulation is bad for them." I pulled my hand back, but the warmth lingered on my fingertips like a ghost. I turned to look at my wife. She was standing there clutching her silk robe around her, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for more threats. But she wasn't looking at the windows or the door, she was looking at me, and for a split second, I saw something in her eyes that chilled me to the bone. It wasn't fear for the children. It was fear of me. It was the look of someone who was afraid of being caught. I stood up, my mind racing. Imani had said, "Check the trash," she had said. They were being shut down. She had said I was blind. I looked at Noah's warm leg, then at Camilla's pale face, and for the first time in 2 years, I wondered if the maid was right, and the doctor was wrong. A seed of doubt had been planted in the cold soil of my grief, and it was beginning to grow dark and twisted roots, reaching down into the secrets of my own home. I needed to know the truth even if it destroyed everything I had left. 1 week without Imani, and the nursery had transformed from a place of healing into a mausoleum. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy and suffocating, like the air before a funeral. My sons, Noah, Liam, and Ethan, were fading right in front of my eyes. Their skin had turned a terrifying shade of gray, like old ash. They did not laugh anymore. They barely blinked. They just lay there staring at the ceiling with glassy, empty eyes. It was as if the life was being drained out of them, drop by drop, leaving only hollow shells behind. Nurse Brenda, the woman Camilla hired the morning after Imani left, was a cold, efficient shadow. She moved around the room with mechanical precision, never speaking to the boys, never touching them with anything resembling affection. I watched her prep the syringes for their afternoon dose, just their daily vitamins. "Mr. Thorne," she said with a smile that never reached her eyes. But I saw the way the liquid looked thick and viscous. She injected it into their IV lines, and within minutes their eyelids would flutter and close, their breathing shallowing to a terrifying rhythm. I did not know then that she was not giving them vitamins. She was pumping them full of high-grade muscle relaxants designed to turn their bodies into wet clay, keeping them pliable and silent. While my sons withered away, Camilla was blooming. She turned the nursery into a studio, setting up ring lights and tripods right next to their hospital beds. Every afternoon, she put on a face full of makeup and started her live stream. "Hello, my beautiful followers," she would coo into her phone camera, her voice dripping with fake honey. "It is another hard day for my angels, But we keep fighting, thanks to your prayers and support. She would stroke Liam's pale cheek for the camera, wiping away a fake tear, while the donation ticker on the screen climbed higher and higher. $5,000, $10,000, $50,000 pouring in from strangers who bought her act hook, line, and sinker. She called herself a warrior, a saint, a martyr for raising 3 paralyzed stepchildren. She told the world she was their savior, donating every cent to their care while wearing diamond earrings bought with the funds from the last stream. I am just doing what any mother would do. She sobbed into the lens while checking her reflection in the glass of the window. But the moment the camera turned off, the warmth vanished instantly. She would snap at Brenda to clean up the drool, or complain that Noah's pallor was ruining the lighting. She did not care that they were dying. She only cared that they were dying profitably. I stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching this grotesque theater, my stomach turning in knots. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash her phone and throw Brenda out. But the doubt Imani had planted was still just a seed, and I needed proof. I looked at Noah's sleeping face, his mouth slack, and realized that if I did not act soon, there would not be anything left to save. This was not a home anymore. It was a stage for a tragedy, and Camilla was writing the final act in real time, 5 miles away from the gilded gates of the Thorne estate, in a basement apartment that smelled of damp concrete and stale cooking oil. Imani Lewis was waging a war from a folding table. She was not just a fired maid. She was a ghost, a woman who had been erased from her own life by the very people she was trying to destroy. 3 years ago, Imani had walked the gleaming halls of Johns Hopkins as the youngest lead physical therapy specialist in the department. They called her a prodigy, a healer with hands that could find the smallest spark of life in a damaged nerve. She had a future bright enough to blind anyone watching, but that future ended the day she opened a file on Dr. Adrian Vance. Vance, the man currently being paid $500,000 a year to treat Julian's sons, was not a healer. He was a predator with a medical license. Imani had caught him skimming high-grade pharmaceuticals from the hospital inventory, replacing critical recovery drugs with diluted sedatives to pad his own pockets and keep patients dependent. When she reported him, she thought she was doing the right thing. She thought the system would protect the truth. She was naive. Vance had friends, powerful friends in the medical board, and deep pockets filled with dirty money. Within a week, Imani's evidence had mysteriously disappeared. Her reputation was shredded in the press, and her license was revoked for gross negligence and ethical violations based on fabricated patient complaints. They took everything from her: her career, her name, her dignity. She was blacklisted from every hospital on the East Coast, forced to scrub floors and wash dishes to keep a roof over her head, but they could not take her mind, and they could not take her eyes when she saw Vance's name attached to the high-profile case of the Thorne triplets. In a newspaper article she knew instantly, it was not a tragedy. It was a crime scene she did not apply for the housekeeping job at the Thorne estate, for the paycheck she applied, because she knew that where Vance went, suffering followed. She knew his patterns, she knew his tell. She had spent every night for the past 2 months, not sleeping but studying, analyzing the boys' symptoms from afar, realizing that their paralysis did not match their injuries, the lack of muscle. Atrophy was inconsistent with total spinal severance. The reflex responses she tested in secret were positive proof that the connection was still there, just suppressed. She looked at the wall covered in stolen observation notes and hand-drawn charts. She was the only one who saw the truth, hidden in plain sight. Julian thought he had thrown out the trash, but he had actually thrown out the only person who knew how to save his children. She looked at a grainy photo of Noah pinned to her wall, his eyes pleading for help. She would get back in there, not as a maid, but as the nightmare Dr. Vance never saw coming. She was not fighting for a job, she was fighting for redemption and for 3 little boys who were being erased 1 dose at a time. I sat in the dark of my study. The only light coming from the glowing monitors of my security system sleep was a distant memory. The doubt that Imani had planted in my mind was now a forest of fear, choking me. I had to know the truth. I needed to see what happened in this house when the lights went out and the cameras were supposedly just recording empty hallways. I logged into the deep archive of the cloud server, scrolling back past the last week, past the last month, all the way to the first few days. Imani had started working here. The timestamp on the screen read 2:14 in the morning. The house was silent, a tomb for the living. Everyone should have been asleep, but there was movement on the third floor. Camera, grainy and black and white. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Imani. She was not wearing her stiff gray uniform. She was in a t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot, moving with a stealth that I had mistaken for guilt earlier. But now I saw it for what it was. Caution. She slipped into the nursery and I held my breath, expecting the worst. But what happened next shattered me. She went to Noah's bedside and pulled back the covers. She did not bring out a needle. This time she brought out a small bottle of oil and began to work her hands, moved with a skill and precision that I recognized immediately from the thousands of dollars I had spent on top-tier specialists. She was massaging his atrophied muscles, working the joints, stimulating the blood flow. It was not random, it was a calculated medical routine. She worked on Noah for 40 minutes, sweat dripping from her face. Then she moved to Liam, then Ethan. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, for 2 solid hours. This woman who cleaned my toilets during the day spent her nights fighting a silent war against my sons. Paralysis. She was exhausted. I could see it in the way she slumped against the wall between sessions, rubbing her own aching hands. But she never stopped. She never cut corners. She worked with a ferocity that spoke of desperate love, not malice. I turned up the volume on the feed. The audio was filled with the white noise of the air purifier. But then I heard it. She leaned over Noah, smoothing the hair back from his forehead. Her face was close to his, and I could see the glint of tears on her cheeks. She kissed him gently, a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. And then she whispered words that cut through me like a knife. "I will find a way to save you." She sobbed quietly, her voice breaking. "I promise I will not let them keep you down. You are going to walk again, baby. I swear it on my life." I froze in my chair, the silence of my office pressing in on me. I had called her a sadist. I had called her a monster. I had thrown her out into the storm like garbage, but she was the only one. The only single person in this entire cursed house who was actually trying to save them. She wasn't the villain. She was the guardian. Angel. I had been too blind to see, and I had just destroyed the only chance my sons had. I buried my face in my hands, the weight of my failure crushing me. I had fired the wrong person, and God help me, I had kept the real monster right here in my bed. The next morning, I walked into the breakfast room with a purpose that felt like cold steel in my chest. Camilla was sitting at the table sipping her matcha latte and scrolling through her phone, probably checking the engagement on her latest sob story post about the boys. She looked up and smiled, that dazzling practice smile that I had once fallen for so completely, but now it just looked like a mask painted over something rotten. "Morning, darling," she chirped. "Did you sleep well?" I poured myself a coffee, my hand steady, despite the rage boiling under my skin. "I did not sleep well, actually," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I was thinking about the boys, their progress or lack of it. I made some calls last night to a clinic in Germany, the Munich Neurorehabilitation Center. They are doing groundbreaking work with cases like ours. I want to fly the triplets out there next week for a full evaluation, maybe even a long-term stay." Camilla's smile faltered, the mask slipping just a fraction. "Germany," she repeated, her voice tight. "That is a long flight, Julian. Are you sure that is wise? Dr. Vance says they are too fragile for travel. Like that, Dr. Vance has not shown results in 2 years, I countered, setting my cup down with a deliberate clink. I want a second opinion, and these guys are the best I already have. The jet on standby. We leave Tuesday. Panic flashed in her eyes, real, genuine panic. She stood up, knocking her napkin to the floor. Julian, listen to me, she said, her voice taking on that wheedling, manipulative tone she used when she wanted her way. You are just stressed, you are not thinking clearly. Dr. Vance is the only one who understands their specific condition. He has been with them since the accident. Changing doctors now disrupting their routine, it could kill them. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to risk losing them because you got impatient? I watched her performance detached and cold. She was good. I had to give her that. She played the concerned mother perfectly, invoking fear and guilt to control me. But I was not buying it anymore. I was buying time. We are going, Camilla, I said, finality in my tone. End of discussion. I walked out, leaving her standing there pale and trembling. But I did not go far. I stopped just around the corner in the hallway and listened. I heard her pacing, then the soft beep of her phone being dialed. Answer. Answer, damn it, she hissed into the receiver. Vance, it is me. He wants to take them to Germany next week. Yes, Germany. Some specialist clinic. Listen to me. You have to stop this. If another doctor sees them, if they run blood tests, we are finished. No, I do not care about the risk. Just do it. Increase the dosage, make them sick, make them so weak they cannot even be lifted onto a stretcher. I need them bedridden. Do you hear me? I need them unable to move a muscle. Fix this, Vance, or I will take you down with me. I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes as the confirmation washed over me. Like ice water. She wasn't protecting them. She was imprisoning them. She was poisoning them to keep them broken and dependent on her for her image, for her control, for whatever twisted game she was playing. My wife was a monster, and I had just given her the signal to strike. I had to move fast, faster than her, faster than the poison, because the war for my son's lives had just begun, and the first casualty was going to be my marriage. They threw me out, like I was nothing, but they forgot that I am a woman who knows how to survive in the shadows. I spent 3 days sitting in a rented delivery van, parked down the street from the Thorne estate, wearing a uniform I bought at a thrift store, and a cap pulled low over my eyes. I was not eating. I was not sleeping. I was watching. I knew the rhythm of that house better than the people who lived in it. I knew that on Tuesdays, the private waste management team came for the main bins, but I also knew that Camilla was paranoid. She had a separate disposal routine for her personal items, things she did not want the regular staff to see. She thought she was being discreet by handling it herself, but arrogance is a spotlight if you know where to look. I waited until the sun was barely painting the sky gray. The morning fog was thick, clinging to the pavement like a shroud. The service gate creaked open and the junior housekeeper, a girl who looked too tired for her age, dragged out 3 sleek black bags and left them by the curb. Not the main dumpster, the curb for the specialty recycling truck. Camilla claimed she was eco-friendly, but I knew she was just hiding evidence. I gave it 5 minutes scanning for the security cameras. I knew the blind spots. I had cleaned them 1,000 times. I moved fast, sprinting across the wet asphalt, grabbing the bags and tossing them into the back of my van before driving 2 blocks away to a dead-end alley behind an abandoned mechanic shop. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, burning rage. I tore open the first bag. Designer makeup wipes stained with foundation. Empty champagne bottles, receipts for jewelry that cost more than my entire tuition. Nothing but vanity and waste. The second bag was clothes silk ruined by wine stains, shoes with broken heels thrown away like they were paper. But the third bag felt different, heavier at the bottom. I ripped it open, and the smell of expensive perfume mixed with chemical antiseptic hit me. I sifted through the layers of tissues and cotton balls, my heart hammering against my ribs like a war drum until my fingers brushed against cold glass. I pulled it out. It was a small vial, no larger than my thumb. The label had been peeled off, but the adhesive was still sticky, leaving a jagged white scar on the amber glass. I held it up to the dim light filtering through the van window. There was a tiny amount of liquid left at the bottom, just a few drops clear and odorless. But it was the cap that froze my blood. It had a distinct safety seal, marking a red cross, with a serial number stamped into the plastic. I recognized that stamp. I had seen it before in the locked cabinets of the hospital pharmacy, where Dr. Vance stored his restricted inventory. Back when I was still a respected specialist. This was not a vitamin supplement. This was not a herbal remedy. This was a schedule. 4 muscle relaxant, usually reserved for major surgery. Intubation, powerful enough to paralyze a grown man, and she was giving it to 6-year-old boys. The realization made me nauseous. My knees hit the floor of the van. I wrapped the vial in a clean handkerchief, handling it like it was radioactive. I had the weapon now. I just needed to load the gun. Camilla thought she had buried her secrets in a black plastic bag, but she had just handed me the shovel to dig her grave. I started the engine, my hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles. I was not just a fired maid anymore. I was the witness for the prosecution, and court was about to be in session. I found her in a place that smelled of burnt grease and old mop water. A 24-hour diner on the edge of the city where the neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat. I parked my car blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, my expensive Italian leather shoes splashing through puddles of questionable substance. I did not belong here, and every person I passed knew it. But I did not care. I had to see her. I pushed past the confused hostess and went straight for the kitchen. The double doors swung open to reveal a chaotic scene of shouting cooks and sizzling griddles, steam rising in thick clouds that clung to my skin. In the back corner, standing over a massive industrial sink, was Imani. She was wearing a rubber apron that was too big for her, and her arms were buried deep in gray sudsy water. Scrubbing plates with a mechanical rhythm, she looked exhausted. Her posture slumped, but there was a tension in her shoulders that told me she knew I was there before I even spoke. Imani, I said, my voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. She stopped scrubbing, but she did not turn around. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink, her knuckles white against the metal. I took a step closer, ignoring the dirty look from a line cook who was chopping onions with a cleaver. Imani, please, I need to talk to you. She turned slowly, wiping her wet hands on a rag. Her face was hard, her eyes cold and empty of the warmth. I had seen when she looked at my sons. She did not look like a maid anymore. She looked like a judge, and I was the one on trial. What do you want? She asked, her voice flat, cutting through the noise of the kitchen. Do you have more insults for me? Are you here to threaten me again? I flinched, the shame hitting me like a physical blow. No, I said quickly, stepping into her space, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I checked the logs. I went back through the cloud servers. I saw what you were doing at night, the therapy, the massages. I saw how you tried to wake their legs up. I saw you crying over them. I was wrong, Imani. I was so wrong. I am sorry. I should have trusted my gut instead of my fear. I expected her to soften. I expected relief or maybe anger. But she just looked at me with a terrifying indifference. Save your apology, she spat, her voice low and venomous. I do not want your guilt, Julian. Your guilt does not help Noah walk. Your sorrow does not keep Liam from fading away. Stop thinking about yourself for 1 second and think about them. She reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out a small object wrapped in a napkin. She looked around, checking to make sure no one was watching. Then she shoved it into my hand, her fingers brushing mine with a touch that was cold and businesslike. Take this, she ordered, her eyes locking onto mine with a ferocity that scared me. I looked down at my hand. She had given me a small amber glass vial, the label torn off, leaving only a sticky residue. What is this? I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It is what I found in your wife's private trash," she said, leaning in close, her whisper like a shout in my ear. "She throws these away where the staff cannot see them. Take it to your lab, run a full toxicology screen on the residue inside. Do not ask me what it is, just test it." I stared at the vial, the world narrowing down to that small piece of glass in my palm. "You think she is poisoning them?" I asked, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Imani stepped back, returning to her sink, picking up a dirty plate as if our conversation was over. "Do not ask me what I think," she said over her shoulder. "Get the proof. Then come back when you are ready to do something about it. Now get out of my kitchen before you get me fired from this job too." I stood there for a moment, paralyzed by the weight of the vial in my hand and the truth in her eyes. Then I turned and walked out of the grease and the noise back into the cold night air, knowing that my life had just changed forever and the war had officially begun. I stood in the sterile white light of my private biotechnology laboratory, deep beneath the headquarters of Thorne Industries, looking at the centrifuge spinning down. It held the sample from the vial Imani had given me. My chief toxicologist, Dr. Iris, stood by the computer bank. His face was pale as a sheet. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you need to look at this right now." I walked over and stared at the glowing screen. The chemical breakdown was displayed in stark red letters: 90% synthetic curare, 10% scopolamine derivative. My breath caught in my throat. Curare was not a vitamin. It was not a therapy drug. It was a neuromuscular blocking agent, a poison used on the tips of arrows in the Amazon or in lethal injections to stop the heart. It paralyzed voluntary muscles while leaving the victim fully conscious and able to feel pain. And scopolamine, that was a mind control drug, something used to make victims compliant and foggy, unable to form new memories. Dr. Aris looked at me with terror in his eyes. "Sir, this dosage is precise. It is calculated to mimic spinal paralysis without killing the subject. If this has been administered daily over a long period, it would cause total muscle flaccidity. The legs would not move, the reflexes would vanish, but the nerves would still be alive." The room started to spin. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the steel counter. My sons, Noah, Liam, and Ethan, they were not paralyzed. They never were. The car accident 2 years ago had hurt them, yes, but they should have healed. They should have been walking by now, running, playing. Instead, they were trapped in their own bodies, frozen by a chemical prison administered by the woman who tucked them in at night. She wasn't treating them. She was marinating them in poison, keeping them broken to play the grieving mother for her charity galas and Instagram followers. I looked down at the glass of scotch I had been nursing to steady my nerves. The amber liquid trembled in my hand, just like the poison in the vial. Rage, hot and blinding, erupted in my chest like a volcano. I hurled the glass across the room with a primal scream. It shattered against the reinforced glass wall, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards that rained down like diamonds mixed with blood. My sons were alive. They could walk, they could run, but they were being held hostage by chemistry and cruelty. I looked at Dr. Aris. "Get out," I growled. "Get out and tell no one what you saw here today." He scrambled for the door, leaving me alone in the humming silence of the lab. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. I did not see a billionaire. I did not see a CEO. I saw a father who had been asleep for 2 years and had just woken up to a nightmare. But now I was awake, and God help Camilla, because I was coming for her. And I was bringing the fire. I stormed. Back into the diner kitchen, my blood boiling hotter than the fryer's. I slammed the toxicology report onto the stainless steel counter right next to where Imani was stacking dirty dishes. She jumped, but her eyes went straight to the paper. She read the red text, and her face hardened into a mask of grim satisfaction. "I told you," she whispered. I told you she was hurting them? I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency dial. I am calling the police right now, I said, my voice trembling with rage. I am going to have her arrested. I am going to have Vance stripped of his license and thrown in a cell next to her. They are going to pay for every single day my son suffered. Imani moved faster than I thought possible. She reached out with a wet, soapy hand and clamped it over my phone, forcing my arm down. No, she hissed, her eyes wide with panic. Do not make that call. Put the phone away. Julian, think I stared at her, incredulous. Think she is poisoning my children? What is there to think? About you are not thinking like a predator. You are thinking like a father, and that is going to get you beat, Imani said, wiping her hands on her apron. Listen to me. Camilla's father is Judge Sterling, the most powerful judge in the state. Dr. Vance sits on the medical board with the police chiefs. Brother, if you call 911, now the dispatch will flag the address. Her father will get a courtesy call within 5 minutes. And by the time the squad car rolls up your driveway, that poison will be flushed down the toilet, and those boys will just be tragic victims of a genetic anomaly. Again. I froze, the reality of her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. She was right. I was a billionaire, but I was playing a game where the rules were rigged by old money and influence. If I went to the law now without irrefutable proof, they would spin this. They would say the test was contaminated. They would say I was a grieving husband, having a breakdown, and Camilla would play the victim again, and my sons would never. Wake up, so what do we do? I asked, my voice breaking. I cannot just let her keep doing this. I cannot watch them die. We do not let her. Imani said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We trap her. We do not just catch her. We destroy her. We need to catch her in the act. Red-handed, with the needle in her hand and the poison in the vein. And we need witnesses. Not just you, not just me. We need the whole world to see it. How I asked. Desperate. She looked at me, her eyes calculating, cold and brilliant. You said she loves the spotlight, right? She loves being the saint. Well, let's give her the biggest stage of her life. You are going to leave town. You are going to tell her you are going away on business. She will feel safe. She will get careless. And when she tries to administer that final dose to keep them quiet for her charity party, we are going to be watching. And we are going to make sure everyone else is watching too. I stood in the foyer of my own home, feeling like a spy in enemy territory. My suitcase was packed by the door, not with business suits, but with surveillance gear disguised as luggage. Camilla stood at the bottom of the stairs, wrapping her silk robe around her body like a shield. She looked beautiful and dangerous, a poisonous flower in full bloom. I had to play this perfectly. One wrong look, one hesitation, and she would know something was up. I am heading to Dubai. I lied, keeping my voice flat and businesslike. The merger is falling apart. I need to be there in person to salvage it. I will be gone 3 days. Do not call me unless the house is on fire. She pouted, leaning in to kiss my cheek, her perfume cloying and sweet. Oh, Julian, she sighed. The boys will miss you. I will miss you. But go save the empire, darling. We will be fine here. I forced myself not to recoil from her touch. Keep them on the schedule, I said, my eyes hard. Dr. Vance knows what to do. Of course. She smiled, and I saw the glint of triumph in her eyes. She was not sad. I was leaving. She was relieved my absence was her freedom. I walked out the door and climbed into the waiting town car as the heavy oak door clicked shut. I watched through the tinted window as she immediately dropped the act. Her shoulders relaxed. She pulled out her phone. Before I was even down the driveway, she was already making calls. I did not go to the airport. I instructed the driver to take me to the safe house, a discreet apartment 3 blocks away where Imani was waiting with the monitors. We were not going to Dubai. We were going to war back inside the house the moment my car disappeared around the bend. Camilla was in motion. She did not go check on the boys. She went straight to her office and dialed her event planner. Get the catering team ready, I heard her say, through the bug we had planted in the kitchen. Julian is gone for 3 days. I want to host the gala for the Disabled Children's Fund tomorrow night. Yes, right here at the mansion. She was pacing now, her voice giddy with excitement. I want the press, I want the donors, and I want a spotlight on the main staircase. I am going to make a speech about the burden of care, about the sacrifices I make for these poor, broken children, make sure the lighting is tragic, but flattering. She was planning her moment of glory. She wanted to parade my dying sons in front of high society to collect checks and sympathy. She wanted to be the saint of San Francisco while injecting poison into their veins upstairs. I sat next to Imani in the cramped safe house, watching the feed. She is doing exactly what you said she would. I whispered, awe and disgust warring in my chest. Imani nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. She is arrogant, Julian, she said softly. She thinks she is untouchable in that house. She thinks she is the director of this play. But she is just an actor, and she does not know her lines. For the final act are about to change. Camilla hung up the phone, laughing to herself. Perfect, she whispered to the empty room. 3 days of freedom, time to finish this. She did not know that in 24 hours that house would be filled not just with her friends, but with the truth she had tried so hard to bury. The stage was set, the players were in position, and tomorrow night, the curtain would rise on her destruction. The uniform scratched my skin, but it was the best armor I had. I slipped into the crowded kitchen of the catering company. My friend Tasha handed me a tray of crystal champagne flutes. Without asking questions, she knew I was desperate, and she knew I was good people. Do not look at the help, they look through them, and tonight, that invisibility was my superpower. I walked through the service entrance of the Thorne estate for the first time since I was thrown out into the rain. The house smelled of expensive lilies and roasting duck, a sickening perfume that covered up the scent of decay. Camilla was in the main hall, barking orders at the florists, her voice shrill and demanding. She wanted white lilies everywhere, symbols of innocence. She screamed at a terrified assistant. While checking her reflection in a mirror, she looked stunning in a blood-red gown, a predator dressed for a feast. I lowered my head and walked past her, blending into the swarm of waiters setting up for the gala. She did not even blink. She did not see the woman she had slapped. She only saw a pair of hands holding a tray. I waited for the crash of a dropped platter in the kitchen, a moment of chaos that drew everyone's eyes. And in that split second of distraction, I slipped into the service elevator and hit the button for the 3rd floor. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. This was the most dangerous part. If Dr. Vance or Nurse Brenda caught me, now there would be no police. There would just be an accident, a fall down the stairs, or a silence that lasted forever. The nursery hallway was dim. The guards were downstairs securing the perimeter for the VIP guests. Arrogance had made them sloppy. They thought the threat was outside the gates, not inside the walls. I pushed open the nursery door, and the sight of them almost broke me. Noah, Liam, and Ethan lay in their beds, pale and still like statues in a museum. They were breathing, but barely, their little chests rising and falling in a rhythm that was too slow, too artificial. I moved to the medical cart in the corner. It was already prepped for the night. 3 syringes sat on a silver tray filled with a clear liquid that looked like water. But I knew it was the chemical chains that bound my boys to their beds. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the case. Julian had given me inside were 3 identical syringes, but these were filled with life, not death. They contained a high-dose muscle stimulant and a neural wake-up agent designed to flood their systems and shock their sleeping nerves back into action. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the adrenaline of holding their lives in my palm. I swapped the syringes, placing the poison in my pocket and the cure on the tray. It took less than 10 seconds, but it felt like a lifetime. I looked at Noah. His eyes were closed, but I leaned down and whispered into his ear, "Wake up, little warrior. The cavalry is here. You have to fight tonight. Do you hear me? You have to fight, because the whole world is going to be watching." I slipped back out of the room just as the heavy footsteps of Dr. Vance echoed at the end of the hall. I pressed myself into the linen closet, holding my breath as he walked past me, humming a tune to himself. He entered the nursery to administer the pre-party dose. He picked up the syringes I had just placed there, unaware that he was about to become the instrument of his own destruction. I waited until the door clicked shut, then I exhaled a shaky breath. The trap was set, the players were on stage, and the fuse was lit. Now all we had to do was wait for the explosion. The Thorne estate had transformed from a silent fortress into a glittering carnival of lies. Limousine after limousine pulled up to the circular driveway, depositing the elite of San Francisco onto the red carpet that had been rolled out over the wet pavement. Photographers shouted names, blinding the guests with flashes that cut through the night like lightning bolts. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume, a suffocating sweetness that tried to mask the rot at the center of this family. I watched it all from the shadows of the service entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to break free. I adjusted the surgical mask on my face, pulling it high over the bridge of my nose. Thank God for modern hygiene protocols in the catering industry tonight. My anonymity was my shield. I was wearing the stiff black and white uniform of the catering company borrowed from a friend who asked no questions. I was not Imani. Louis, the disgraced maid. I was just a pair of hands holding a tray invisible to the people who looked right through the help. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors into the kitchen and was immediately assaulted by the chaos. Chefs were shouting orders, pans were clanging, and servers were rushing in and out with trays of hors d'oeuvres. I kept my head down, grabbing a silver platter filled with champagne flutes. My hands were trembling, but I forced them to still. I could not drop a single glass. I could not draw a single second of attention to myself. I walked out into the grand hall, and the sight of her almost made me sick. Camilla stood at the base of the main staircase, basking in the adoration of the crowd. She was wearing a gown the color of fresh blood, a strapless red silk masterpiece that clung to her body and pooled around her feet. She looked stunning and terrifying. A predator, dressed for a feast. She was holding court with a group of reporters, her hand resting dramatically on her chest. "It is so hard," she was saying, her voice trembling with practiced emotion, "especially with Julian away on business. He tries so hard to be strong, but the burden of 3 disabled children, it takes a toll on him. I am just trying to keep the light burning in this house for their sake." The reporters nodded sympathetically, scribbling down her lies, vultures eating up the scraps she threw them. I walked past them, offering champagne to a man in a tuxedo who did not even look at me as he took a glass. The irony burned in my throat. She was down here drinking vintage Dom Perignon and collecting checks for a charity that bore her name, while upstairs the very children she claimed to save were lying in drug-induced comas, their muscles wasting away, their minds trapped in a fog she created. I scanned the room looking for the security detail. They were distracted, relaxed, enjoying the free food and the proximity to power. They thought the threat was outside the gates. They never imagined the enemy was already inside, walking among them, carrying a tray of crystal glasses. I moved toward the back of the room, toward the service elevator that led to the upper floors. My pulse was roaring in my ears, drowning out the string quartet playing Mozart. I had to time this perfectly. One look from the head of security, one slip of my mask, and it would all be over. But I looked at Camilla one last time, watching her throw her head back and laugh, a sound that chilled my blood, and I knew I would walk through fire to take that smile off her face tonight. The party was hers, but the reckoning was mine. The service elevator hummed a low mechanical note as it climbed away from the laughter and clinking glasses of the gala downstairs. With every floor, the air grew colder and the silence heavier. I watched the numbers tick upward, my reflection in the brushed metal doors, staring back at me, a stranger in a stolen uniform holding a tray of nothing but empty air. The doors slid open on the 3rd floor, and I stepped out into the lion's den. The hallway leading to the nursery was not empty. Two of Julian's private security team were stationed at the far end near the main staircase. But I knew something they did not. I knew the shift change protocols, and I knew that at exactly 9:15, the senior guard would walk to the west window to check the perimeter floodlights, leaving a blind spot for exactly 45 seconds. I had scrubbed these floors while they patrolled. I had dusted the baseboards while they gossiped. They never noticed the maid, but the maid noticed everything. I pressed my back against the velvet wallpaper, breathing in shallow, silent rhythms. I waited for the heavy thud of boots to move away. 1, 2, 3. Now I moved, staying low, hugging the shadows of the decorative pillars. I was not running. I was gliding a ghost in catering blacks. I slipped past the open archway, just as the guard turned his back to light a cigarette by the window. He never saw me. He never felt the breeze of my passing. I reached the nursery door, my hand hovering over the handle, praying it was not locked from the inside. The latch clicked softly, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet, but no one came running. I slipped inside and closed the door, leaning against it for a moment to stop my knees from shaking. The smell hit me first. It was not the scent of baby powder or warm milk. It was the sterile, biting odor of rubbing alcohol and stagnation. The room was dim, lit only by the blinking green eyes of medical monitors. I walked to the beds, my heart breaking all over again. Noah, Liam, and Ethan. My three little warriors were lying on their backs in identical positions, like dolls left on a shelf. Their eyes were half open, but there was no light behind them, no recognition, just a milky drug-induced haze that turned their vibrant spirits into ghosts. I touched Noah's hand. It was clammy and limp, his fingers curled weakly around mine, not gripping, just resting there without strength. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run downstairs and tear Camilla apart with my bare hands for doing this to them. But I swallowed the rage, tasting bile and fear. I did not have time for anger. I only had time for action. I looked at the clock on the wall, ticking away the seconds until Dr. Vance would come for his rounds. I had 5 minutes to save their lives or watch them disappear forever. I reached into my apron for the case, listening to the shallow rattle of their breathing, knowing that tonight they would either walk out of this prison or none of us would. The muffled bass of the string quartet drifting up from the floorboards felt like a countdown clock ticking away. The seconds of my life. I stood over Noah's bed, the syringe in my hand feeling heavier than lead. This was the point of no return. If I was wrong, if Dr. Vance was actually telling the truth, and I injected a high-dose stimulant into a child with a severed spine, I could cause a seizure. I could kill him, but I looked at Noah's face, pale and waxy, and I knew I was right. I had to be right, because the alternative was letting them slowly fade into nothingness. I uncapped the needle, my hands surprisingly steady. Now that the moment had arrived, I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead, feeling the cold sweat on his skin. "Forgive me, baby," I whispered. "This is going to hurt, but it is the good kind of hurt. It is the kind that wakes you up." I found the vein in his thigh, the same spot where I had seen the mark of the poison so many times before, and I pushed the needle in. He did not flinch. This time the sedatives in his system were too strong. But as I depressed the plunger, sending the adrenaline and muscle activator rushing into his bloodstream, I saw a subtle shift in his breathing. A hitch, a catch, as if his body was remembering how to take a full breath. I pulled the needle out and moved instantly to Liam. Then Ethan, moving with the efficiency of a combat medic on a battlefield. 1, 2, 3 injections, 3 chances at life. 3 prayers sent up to a God who had been looking the other way for too long. I tossed the empty syringes into the waste bin and leaned over them, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I placed my hands on Noah's shoulders, gripping him. "Tight, wake up!" I hissed, my voice fierce and low. "Wake up, you little warriors. You have been sleeping for 2 years, and it is time to get up today. You have to fight today. You are not victims. You are soldiers. Do you hear me? Fight the fog? Noah, fight it. The room was silent, save for the hum of the monitors. I watched the heart rate on Noah's screen. It was rising, climbing from a sluggish 60 beats per minute to 70, then 80. The adrenaline was hitting. His heart was waking up. Come on, I urged, tears stinging my eyes. Come back to me. And then I heard it, a sound so faint I almost missed it, a low, guttural groan escaping. Noah's lips, his brow furrowed, the smooth, unlined skin crinkling in confusion and discomfort. His head turned sharply to the left on the pillow, and then the miracle happened. His foot, the left one sticking out from under the sheet, twitched. It was not a spasm. It was a movement, a deliberate contraction of the toes curling inward as the nerves fired for the first time in months. Slapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. He was moving. He was feeling the fire in his veins. The connection was not broken. It was just asleep, and I had just rung the alarm bell. He groaned again, louder this time, his eyes fluttering rapidly, trying to fight the weight of the eyelids. I grabbed his hand, squeezing it hard. I am here, Noah, I whispered. I am here, and I am never leaving you again. Now, get up. Baby, get up and show them what you can do. The poison is gone, the fire is back. Burn it all down, Noah. Burn it all down. I had just dropped the empty syringes into the disposal bin when the heavy oak door clicked open behind me. The sound was not loud, but in the terrified silence of the nursery, it sounded like a thunderclap. I spun around my back, pressing against the medical cart, knocking over a tray of gauze. Dr. Adrian Vance stood in the doorway, adjusting his silk tie, looking every bit the respected physician he pretended to be. He froze, his eyes widening as they landed on me, then on the open medical bag at my feet, and finally on the boys who were starting to stir in their beds. You, he whispered, the word escaping his lips like a hiss of steam. You dirty little rat. I knew you were trouble the moment I saw you scrubbing the floors. He did not call for the guards. He did not shout for help. He was a smart man, and in that split second, he calculated the odds. If he called security, they would ask why the maid was in here, and they might look too closely at the drugs on the tray. He realized what I realized, that this was a private war, and he intended to end it right here. He lunged at me with a speed that belied his age. He was a large man, heavy with the weight of expensive dinners and arrogance. And I was small, but he made the mistake of thinking I was just a victim. He grabbed me by the throat, his fingers digging into my windpipe, driving me back against the wall with a force that made stars explode behind my eyes. You ruined everything. He snarled, his face inches from mine, smelling of scotch and mints. I had a good thing going here, you ungrateful wretch. I am going to snap your neck and tell them you tripped. My vision started to tunnel, the edges turning black as his thumbs pressed down on my carotid artery. I clawed at his hands, but his grip was like iron. Panic flared hot and bright in my chest, urging me to thrash, to kick, to scream, but I forced it down. I was not just a maid. I was a specialist. I knew the human body better than he did. I knew where the bones connected, and more importantly, I knew where the nerves were exposed. I stopped fighting his hands and went limp for a fraction of a second, confusing him. His grip loosened, just a fraction, thinking I was passing out, and that was my opening. I brought my hands up, not to scratch his face, but to strike with precision. My thumb found the soft hollow beneath his jaw, right where the cluster of nerves connected to the vagus nerve. I drove my thumb into the pressure point with every ounce of strength I had, channeling all my rage, all my fear, all the love for those 3 boys into a single calculated strike. Vance let out a strangled yelp, his eyes bulging as his body betrayed him. His hands flew from my throat to his neck, his system shocked by the sudden overload of pain. I did not stop. I stepped in closer, driving my elbow into his solar plexus, forcing the air from his lungs. He stumbled back, gasping, wheezing, crashing into the side table. I stood over him, breathing hard, rubbing my bruised throat. "You forgot, doctor," I rasped, my voice raw. "I know exactly how to hurt you because I know exactly how you work. Get up. I am not done with you yet." He looked up at me, terror replacing the arrogance in his eyes. But before I could move to restrain him, the door swung open again, and this time it was not a doctor, it was a monster in a red dress. The heavy oak door did not slam open, it slid open, with the terrifying smoothness of a coffin lid closing. Camilla stood framed in the light of the hallway, the sounds of the string quartet and polite laughter drifting in behind her like a cruel joke. She was still holding a glass of champagne, her knuckles white against the crystal stem. She looked at Dr. Vance wheezing on the floor, clutching his chest, and then her gaze snapped to me. Standing defiantly by the bed, I expected her to scream. I expected her to run into the hall and shriek for the security team to come save her from the crazy maid. But she did none of those things. Camilla was a survivor, and survivors know that screaming attracts attention, and attention gets you caught. She stepped inside the nursery, the silk of her red gown rustling like dry leaves, and quietly clicked the lock shut, turning the deadbolt with a finality that made my blood run cold. "You," she whispered, the word dripping with a hatred so pure it felt physical. "You are like a cockroach that just will not die. I flush you down the toilet, and here you are crawling back up the pipes." She took a sip of her champagne, her eyes scanning the room, assessing the situation with the cold calculation of a general looking at a battlefield. She saw the open medical bag. She saw the boys stirring in their beds, and she saw the fear in Vance's eyes. But instead of panic, a twisted smile slowly spread across her face, warping her beautiful features into something grotesque. "I should call the guards," she said softly, walking toward me, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "But then the press would see you. They would ask questions. They would want to know why a former employee is in the nursery, and why my dear Dr. Vance looks so guilty. No, we cannot have a scene. Not tonight. Tonight is about perfection." She set the champagne glass down on the nightstand next to Noah's head, ignoring the way his hand was twitching. She looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive carpet. "You just could not leave it alone. Could you?" she hissed, leaning in close, her perfume cloying and sweet, masking the scent of her corruption. "You had to play hero. You had to try and save them. Save them for what? For a life of mediocrity, at least with me. They serve a purpose. They are the tragic angels that make me the saint of San Francisco, and you are just the dirt under my fingernails." She turned to Vance, who was pulling himself up, using the edge of the dresser, his face red and furious. "Get up, you idiot," she snapped at him. "Stop whining and finish this." Vance looked at her, then at me, rubbing his bruised throat. "What do you want me to do?" he rasped. "She is dangerous." Camilla reached into her clutch and pulled out a tube of lipstick, checking her reflection in the mirror before snapping it shut. "Make her disappear, Vance," she said casually, as if ordering a coffee. "Use the reserve supply, give her the Sleeping Beauty treatment, and make sure she never wakes up. We will roll her up in a rug and take her out with the trash in the morning, right where she belongs." Vance looked at the tray of syringes on the cart, the ones I had swapped. But he did not know that he grinned a cruel, ugly thing and reached for the nearest needle. "Do it," Camilla ordered, her voice turning to steel. "Do it now before the music stops downstairs." Dr. Vance did not stay down. He scrambled to his feet, a desperate animal cornered and dangerous before I could turn to run. His arm locked around my throat, like a vice dragging me backward off my feet. His other hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream against his sweaty palm. He was heavy, a dead weight of panic and violence. And as he squeezed the air from my lungs, I felt my feet kicking uselessly against the shins of his expensive tuxedo pants. I clawed at his arm, my nails digging into the fabric, but his adrenaline was spiking just as high as mine, and he was fighting for his life. He leaned close to my ear, his breath hot and ragged. "Hold her still." He grunted to himself. "Hold her still and finish it." I struggled to turn my head, my vision swimming with black spots. And that is when I saw her. Camilla was walking toward us. Not running, not rushing, but gliding with a terrifying calmness, her red dress swishing around her legs like a pool of blood. She held the syringe I had swapped earlier, the one she thought contained the lethal overdose. But even though I knew it was harmless saline in that barrel, the look in her eyes was toxic enough to kill. She uncapped the needle with a flick of her thumb, the silver tip catching the light of the chandelier. "Hold her head up, Vance," she ordered, her voice cool and detached, like she was instructing a gardener on how to prune a rosebush. "I cannot find a vein if she keeps thrashing around." I looked past Camilla's hip, past the deadly needle, and focused everything I had left on the 3 beds behind her. The boys were moving. The antidote was tearing through their systems, waking up nerves that had been asleep for 2 years. But they were confused. They were scared, their bodies felt heavy and foreign to them. They needed a command. They needed a reason to fight through the paralysis. I bit down hard on Vance's hand, tasting the metallic tang of blood. He yelped and pulled his hand away from my mouth for just a split second. It was all I needed. I drew in a ragged gasp of air, filling my burning lungs, and screamed with every ounce of strength I had left. "Noah, Ethan." "Liam, stand up." I shrieked, my voice cracking but echoing off the walls like a battle cry. "Look at me, stand up. The witch is hurting me. She is going to kill me. If you do not get up right now, stand up, soldiers, stand up." Vance slammed his hand back over my mouth, cursing violently, tightening his grip on my throat until my windpipe felt like it was going to snap shut. "Up, you crazy bitch," he hissed, panic making his voice shrill. Camilla lunged forward, the needle poised to strike my neck. Her face twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. But I kept my eyes locked on Noah. He had heard me. His eyes were wide open now, staring at me across the room, staring at the woman who had tormented him for years, and the woman who had loved him like a mother. He saw the needle, he saw violence, and something inside him snapped deeper than the medicine, stronger than the fear. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the sheets. I saw the muscles in his arms corded with strain. He was not just waking up, he was engaging. He was fighting the gravity that had held him down for 700 days. He let out a roar, a sound that was half sob and half warrior cry, and threw his weight to the side. His legs, the legs that were supposed to be dead, swung over the edge of the bed and hit the floor with a heavy thud. He was not standing yet, but he was trying. And that terrified Camilla more than any police siren ever could. I sat in the command center, buried deep beneath the foundation of the estate, a room filled with the hum of cooling fans and the glow of a dozen high-definition monitors. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. They were trembling with the effort of holding myself back. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab the weapon on the desk and sprint up the 3 flights of stairs to the nursery to tear Dr. Vance off Imani and shatter the syringe in Camilla's hand. But I knew Imani was right. If I stopped this now without the world seeing it, Camilla would spin a story. She would cry and claim self-defense. She would say Imani was the attacker, and my money would not be enough to silence her father, the judge. So I forced myself to sit in the ergonomic chair watching the nightmare unfold on screen, 4 in crystal clear, 4K resolution. I watched Vance struggle with the woman who had risked everything for my children. I saw the veins bulging in his neck. I saw the terror in Imani's eyes. But I also saw the fire there. She was buying me time. She was screaming at my sons, waking them up, and I had to do my part. My fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard, bypassing the estate's standard security protocols and hacking into the event management system that was currently running the gala upstairs. I could see the feed from the ballroom on screen. 200s of guests were mingling, holding crystal flutes, oblivious to the violence happening 50 feet above their heads, behind the stage where the string quartet was playing. There was a massive 200-inch LED screen currently displaying a looping slideshow of my sons. Photos. Photos Camilla had staged to pull at the heartstrings of donors. I typed in the override command, locking out the AV technicians in the ballroom. I watched the code cascade down my monitor, turning green as I seized control of the audio and visual systems of the entire house. I had the power to turn off the lights, to lock the doors, to shut it all down. But I did not want darkness. I wanted light, blinding, unforgiving light. I synced the feed from the nursery camera to the main output channel. But I did not hit execute yet. I needed the image to be undeniable. I needed the frame that would send Camilla to prison for the rest of her life. I watched her on the monitor. She was stepping closer to Imani, the syringe raised high, the light. Catching the liquid inside her face was twisted into a mask of pure malice, a look that no jury could ever mistake, for fear she looked like an executioner enjoying her work. "Wait for it," I whispered to myself, sweat stinging my eyes. Wait for the shot. There it was. She was framed perfectly in the center of the lens, the needle, the dress, the rage, the victim. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the enter key. This was it, the end of her reign and the beginning of our lives. I pressed the button hard, feeling the plastic click beneath my finger, and whispered, "Showtime. Chao ban, de la noizung. Duan 24. The broadcast. Phát sóng được viết chi tiết bằng tiếng Anh, tối ưu hóa cho dòng đọc AI. Liên mật giao cảm xúc không khí thu lại, đúng theo yêu cầu của bạn." Downstairs, in the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was electric, with the buzz of high society gossip and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes. The string quartet was playing a soothing waltz, and the guests were admiring the massive LED screen behind the stage, which was cycling through heartwarming black and white photos of the triplets, carefully curated to tug at the heartstrings of the wealthy donors. Everyone was smiling, everyone was drinking, and for a moment it seemed like Camilla had won. She was standing near the front, raising her glass for a toast, basking in the adoration of the crowd, her red dress shimmering under the chandeliers. But then the music died. Not a fade out, but a sudden violent cut that left a ringing silence in the air. The guests looked around, confused, murmuring to one another, wondering if it was a technical glitch or part of the show. Suddenly, the massive screen behind the stage flickered, the black and white photos of smiling children vanished, replaced by a blast of static that made people cover their ears. And then the image stabilized into a crystal-clear 4,000-pixel nightmare, broadcast live from the nursery upstairs. The gasp that tore through the room sucked the oxygen right out of the air on the screen larger than life. Was Dr. Vance, the man many of these guests trusted with their own lives, but he did not look like a doctor. Now, he looked like a beast, his face purple with exertion, his hands clamped tight around the throat of a small woman in a catering uniform, pinning her against the wall while she kicked and clawed for air. The violence was raw and unfiltered, shocking the room into a paralyzed silence. But it was the woman next to him that made the blood run cold. Camilla, the hostess, the grieving stepmother, was standing in the center of the frame, her face twisted into a snarl that looked less like a human and more like a demon. She was holding a syringe high in the air, the needle glinting menacingly under the lights. She wasn't crying, she wasn't scared, she was furious. Then the audio kicked in loud and distorted, booming through the concert speakers, shaking the floorboards. Camilla's voice, usually so sweet and measured, was a screech of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Die, you little rat!" she screamed, her voice echoing off the ballroom walls. "Die right now, so I can finish off those 3 useless cripples and take every single dime of this estate. Do you hear me? I will kill them all." The sound of a glass shattering against the marble floor broke the trance. A waiter had dropped his tray, his mouth hanging open in horror. But no one looked at him. Every eye was glued to the screen, watching the woman they had just toasted confess to attempted murder in real time. The facade of the loving mother did not just crack, it exploded, showering the room with the ugly, sharp shards of the truth. And in the center of the ballroom, the real Camilla, who had been smiling seconds ago, felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of heads turned slowly to look at her with a mix of shock and revulsion. The sound of expensive crystal shattering against the marble floor was the only thing that broke the vacuum of silence that had sucked the air out of the room. It was a glass of vintage Merlot, dropped by the mayor's wife, and the dark red liquid pooled around her satin shoes like a premonition of violence. But she did not look down. No one looked down. Every single pair of eyes in that ballroom was locked onto the massive screen above the stage, where the feed from the nursery continued to play out in horrifying high definition. For a heartbeat, no one moved. It was as if the entire gala had been turned to stone by the Medusa on the screen. The wealthy donors, the politicians, the socialites who had paid thousands of dollars to be here, stood with their mouths hanging open, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. The woman they had come to celebrate, the woman who had wept on this very stage minutes ago, about her devotion, was now revealed as a butcher in a designer dress. Then the spell broke and chaos rushed in like a tidal wave. The press corps, which had been relegated to the back of the room, surged forward. Phone screens lit up like fireflies in the dark as every reporter, every influencer, every guest with a signal started live streaming. The feed went global in seconds. Millions of people from New York to Los Angeles were watching the unmasking of the Saint of San Francisco. Comments flooded the streams with outrage. The hashtags changed instantly from charity gala to attempted murder. Within moments, the entire country was witnessing the fall of the House of Thorn. Camilla stood frozen in the center of the ballroom, isolated in a spotlight that now felt like an interrogation lamp. She looked around, searching for an ally, for a sympathetic face. But she found none. The adoration she had fed on for years had turned into revulsion. People recoiled from her as if she were contagious. Mothers pulled their daughters close, shielding them from the sight of her. The whispers started low and angry, rising to a dull roar of accusation. She was stripped naked in front of the world, her jewels and her gown unable to hide the rot underneath. A prominent donor, a man who had written a check for $500,000 just an hour before, stepped forward. His face purple with rage, he threw his champagne glass at the screen, shattering it against the wall near the image of Camilla's face. It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Shouts erupted from the crowd, demands for justice, cries of betrayal. The security team, which had been guarding the perimeter, looked at each other, uncertain of who to protect: the woman paying their salaries or the victims on the screen. There was no spinning this. There was no public relations firm on earth that could fix this. The image of her face twisted in hate. Holding that needle was burned into the retina of every person in the room. The facade of the grieving stepmother had not just slipped, it had been ripped away, leaving the monster exposed. And for the first time in her life, Camilla felt the crushing weight of consequences bearing down on her. She took a step back, tripping on the hem of her blood-red dress. But there was nowhere to run. The world was watching, and the jury of public opinion had already returned a verdict of guilty. The needle was descending, a silver streak of death aimed right at my jugular vein. Time seemed to slow down, stretching into an eternity where I could see every pore on Camilla's face, every fleck of gold in her eyes that were wide with the anticipation of murder. Dr. Vance held me pinned against the wall, his breath hot and sour on my face, and I knew with terrifying clarity that I was about to die. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the sting of the metal and the cold rush of the darkness that would follow, but the sting never came. Instead, a sound tore through the room, a sound so impossible, so defied the laws of physics, that Dr. Vance froze, his grip on my arms loosening just a fraction. It was the screech of metal against metal, the sound of a hospital bed, railing being gripped with supernatural force, followed by the heavy thud of weight shifting onto the floorboards. I opened my eyes, and what I saw stopped my heart. Camilla had frozen too, the needle hovering in midair, her gaze lifted over my shoulder, her mouth falling open in a silent scream of disbelief. I turned my head, following her stare, and there he was. Noah, my brave little. Noah was not in his bed. He was gripping the metal side rail, his knuckles white as bone, his arms trembling violently with the effort. But his bare feet were planted flat on the floor. The muscles in his legs, the legs that were supposed to be dead, were corded and shaking, firing with the electricity of the antidote and the sheer force of his will. He was pulling himself up, fighting gravity, fighting 2 years of atrophy, fighting the poison that had kept him down. He looked like a ghost rising from the grave, sweat pouring down his pale face, his teeth gritted in a snarl of effort. He let out a guttural roar, a sound of pure primal fury, and pushed himself away from the bed. For one heart-stopping second, he stood there swaying unsupported on his own 2 feet. A miracle standing in the middle of a crime scene, Camilla shrieked, stumbling back, her composure shattering. "No," she screamed. "It is impossible. Sit down, you brat. Sit down." But Noah did not sit down. He moved. He did not walk. It was not graceful. It was a desperate lunge, a cannonball of pure love and rage. He threw his small body forward, using the momentum of his fall as a weapon. He lowered his head and slammed into Camilla with everything he had, his forehead connecting with her stomach with a sickening thud. The impact was not strong enough to hurt a man, but Camilla was off balance, standing in high heels on a polished floor, and she was paralyzed by shock. She gasped the air, leaving her lungs in a whoosh, and toppled backward, like a statue being pulled down. She flailed her arms trying to catch herself, but it was too late. She hit the floor hard, her head bouncing off the rug and the syringe. The deadly weapon that was meant to end my life flew from her hand, skittering across the wooden floor and spinning away into the darkness under the dresser. Noah collapsed on top of her. His energy spent, his legs giving out, but he had done it. He had saved me. He lay there heaving for breath, a tiny warrior who had just slain the giant, while Vance backed away into the corner, his face the color of ash, muttering prayers to a god he had abandoned long ago. The moment Noah hit the floor, I tore the headset from my ears and bolted from the chair. The connection to the screen was severed, but the image of my son fighting for his life was branded onto my retinas. "Move, move, move!" I screamed at the tactical team waiting in the shadows behind me, my voice raw with a panic that had turned into pure kinetic energy. We surged up the narrow service stairs, the heavy boots of the officers thundering behind me like a drum roll of judgment. My heart was pounding harder than my feet against the concrete steps. I did not feel the burn in my legs or the stitch in my side. I only felt the terrifying distance between me and the people I loved. We burst onto the 3rd-floor landing. The hallway that had been silent and terrified just moments ago was now filled with the shouts of confused guests drifting up from below. But I ignored them. I ignored everything except the heavy oak door at the end of the hall, the door that was hiding a murder in progress. It was locked, bolted from the inside by a woman who thought she could control everything. I did not slow down. I did not hesitate. I channeled every ounce of rage, every sleepless night, every tear I had shed for my broken family into my right leg, and I kicked the door just below the handle. Wood splintered with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. The heavy frame gave way under the force of a father's desperation, and the door swung inward, crashing against the wall. The scene inside was a tableau of chaos. Camilla was on the floor, tangled in her dress, struggling to push Noah off her. But Dr. Vance was standing near the wall, his eyes wide with shock. He turned toward me, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender, opening his mouth to spew some lie, some excuse to save his skin. I did not give him the chance. I did not read him his rights. I did not ask for an explanation. I crossed the room in 2 strides, the distance closing in a blur of motion. All the years of helplessness, all the trust he had betrayed, coalesced into a tight fist. I swung with the full weight of my body behind it, connecting squarely with his jaw, the sound of bone. Meeting bone was sickening and satisfying. He crumpled instantly, his eyes rolling back in his head, hitting the floor with a heavy thud, unconscious, before he even landed. Police officers swarmed past me, weapons drawn, shouting orders securing. Camilla, who was now screaming in hysterics, but I had eyes only for one person. Imani was sliding down the wall, her hand clutching her bruised throat, her face pale and gasping for air. She looked small and broken, her strength finally failing her. I dropped to my knees beside her, catching her just before she hit the floor. I pulled her into my arms, feeling the frantic beat of her heart against my chest. "I am here," I whispered, brushing the hair from her sweating face. "I am here, and I have got you. Breathe, Imani. Just breathe. It is over. We won." Camilla scrambled backward, her heels scraping against the hardwood floor. She looked at Vance's unconscious body lying in a heap, then at me cradling Imani, and finally at the open doorway filled with uniformed officers. Panic primal and raw took over. She did not care about her dignity anymore. She did not care about the gala downstairs or the live stream that had just destroyed her life. She just wanted to survive. She kicked off her red stilettos and bolted for the service exit on the far side of the nursery, a desperate rat looking for a hole to crawl into. But she did not make it. 3 feet. She felt a sudden weight clamp onto her right ankle, dragging her down with a force that defied logic. She shrieked and fell forward, her chin hitting the carpet hard. She rolled over, kicking wildly, expecting to see a police officer or a guard, but it was not a guard, it was Liam. He had dragged himself off the bed, his muscles trembling with exhaustion, but his small hands were locked around her calf like a vice. "Get off me!" she screamed, kicking at him, her face twisted in terror. "Get off me, you cripple!" She tried to crawl, but then Ethan was there too, dragging his body across the floor with a determination that brought tears to my eyes. He grabbed her other leg, anchoring her to the spot, and Noah, who was already on the floor, threw his arms around her waist, burying his face in the silk of her dress, holding on with everything he had. It was a scene of poetic justice. Children she had called burdens. The children she had paralyzed to line her pockets were now the living chains keeping her from freedom. They were not strong enough to run yet, but they were strong enough to hold her accountability fast to the floor. She clawed at the rug, dragging them inches, but they would not let go. They held on with the desperate strength of survivors. The police officers swarmed the room, guns lowered as they rushed to intervene. 2 officers grabbed Camilla by the arms, hauling her up from the pile of sobbing children, while paramedics rushed to check on the boys. The click of cold steel handcuffs around her wrists echoed through the room, final and absolute. She thrashed against the restraint, her hair wild, her makeup smeared a grotesque mask of the beauty she once was. "Look," she shrieked, spitting at the officers, her eyes wide and manic. "Look at them, they are moving." She pointed a shaking finger at the boys who were being lifted onto stretchers by the medical team. I was framed. "Do you hear me? It is a setup. They can walk. They have been able to walk the whole time. They tricked me. I am the victim here. They are the liars. They pretended to be sick to ruin me." The room went silent at her accusation, a heavy, disgusted silence that felt like judgment. I stood up slowly, leaving Imani in the care of a medic, and walked toward my ex-wife. My face was a mask of stone. There was no anger left in me, only a terrifying emptiness where my love for her used to be. I stopped inches from her, looking deep into her frantic eyes, silencing her screaming with a look of pure ice. You are right, I said, my voice low and steady, carrying the weight of a final verdict. They can walk, but not because of a trick, and certainly not because of you. They can walk, because the woman you tried to strangle spent every night for 3 months healing the damage you did while you were sleeping in silk sheets, dreaming of their deaths. Amani cured them, Camilla. While you were busy trying to kill them, officers take this woman out of my sight and get her out of my house before I forget that I am a civilized man. The grand staircase of the Thorne estate had been designed for entrances. It was meant for brides descending in white silk and debutantes greeting their admirers. But tonight it was the stage for a walk of shame that would be remembered for a generation. The police officers gripped Camilla's arms tight, marching her down the marble steps she had commissioned herself. She stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the cold stone, her red dress torn and stained, but she could not hide her face. The handcuffs locked behind her back forced her chest out, exposing her to the sea of judgment waiting below. The ballroom had transformed into a pit of vipers. The silence that had followed the broadcast was gone, replaced by a deafening cacophony of shouting and booing the guests. The same people who had sipped her champagne and praised her charity now surged forward, their faces twisted with disgust as she reached the bottom step. The barrier of security guards struggled to hold them back. Hundreds of camera flashes went off at once, a blinding strobe light of accusation capturing every inch of her humiliation. Crying shame monster. The insults rained down on her like stones. She tried to turn away to shield herself from the glare, but there was nowhere to hide. The live stream was still running, and the whole world was watching the saint of San Francisco crumble into dust. Behind her, Dr. Vance was being dragged out by 2 federal agents who had arrived with the second wave of responders. He was not screaming. He was weeping. A pathetic broken sound from a man who had thought himself a god. The medical board representative, who happened to be a guest at the gala, stepped forward and in a moment of pure, unscripted drama, ripped the lapel pin of the medical association right off Vance's tuxedo jacket. It was a symbolic stripping of his rank, done in front of the cameras, and as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, the charge was read out loud enough for the front row to hear conspiracy to commit murder and gross medical malpractice. He was shoved toward the exit, his head hanging low. A man whose career was over before he even reached the police car. I watched all of this from the top of the landing, but I did not feel satisfaction. I did not feel joy. I just felt tired. I turned away from the circus below and walked back into the nursery, where the paramedics were finishing their assessment of Amani. She was sitting on a chair holding an oxygen mask to her face. Her neck was bruising a dark, angry purple where Vance's hands had been, but her eyes were bright and alive. I knelt beside her and gently pulled the mask away. "Can you stand?" I asked softly. She nodded, trying to push herself up, but she swayed her knees, buckling under the adrenaline crash. I did not let her fall. I scooped her up into my arms, lifting her as easily as if she were a child. She weighed nothing, but she felt like the heaviest, most precious thing in the world. Mr. Thorne, the paramedic, started to protest. "She needs a stretcher." I ignored him. I ignored the police chief who was trying to get a statement. I ignored the event planner who was sobbing in the corner. I carried Amani out of the room and past the crowd on the stairs. I did not look at Camilla as she was shoved into a squad car. I did not look at the cameras that turned toward me, hungry for a quote. I looked only at the woman in my arms. The woman who had scrubbed my floors and saved my universe. "Get out of my way." I ordered the reporters blocking the front door, my voice low and dangerous. They parted like the Red Sea, silenced by the look on my face. I carried her out into the cool night air, away from the heat, and the noise, and the lies. I walked straight to the waiting ambulance and laid her gently on the gurney as the doors closed, shutting out the flashing lights. I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 2 years. The nightmare was over, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked clean. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private recovery suite at St. Jude's Medical Center, painting the room in shades of gold and warm honey. It was a stark contrast to the gloom of the Thorne mansion and the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner kitchen where I had spent so many hopeless nights. I shifted against the pillows, the high-thread count sheets cool against my skin. My hand went instinctively to my throat. The bruising was fading, turning from a terrifying purple to a faint yellow memory of Dr. Vance's grip. But the fear that used to live in my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady rhythm of peace. I looked around the room, and the sight before me was better than any dream. My three little warriors, Noah, Liam, and Ethan, were there. They were not running yet. 2 years of poison does not vanish overnight, but they were sitting up in high-tech, motorized wheelchairs, their faces flushed with the pink glow of health, the gray pallor of death was gone, replaced by chubby cheeks and bright, curious eyes. They were laughing, passing a tablet back and forth, arguing over a video game, their voices filling the room with a music I thought I would never hear again. The door clicked open, and Julian walked in. He looked different. He was no longer the hunched, defeated man, wandering the halls of his own mausoleum. He stood tall, his shoulders back, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked like a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side forged in steel. He was carrying a thick manila envelope, and when he saw me awake, his face broke into a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said, his voice soft and intimate. He pulled a chair close to the bed, ignoring the luxury of the room to focus entirely on me. "How are you feeling today, stronger?" I whispered. And I meant it. I feel stronger than I have in years. Julian nodded, his expression turning serious. He placed the envelope in my hands, his fingers brushing mine with a lingering warmth. "You saved my life, Imani," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my sons when I was too blind to see the truth. I can never repay you for that, but I can try to fix what was broken." I looked down at the envelope, my fingers trembling slightly as I undid the clasp. Inside was a heavy cream-colored document embossed with the gold seal of the State Medical Board. I pulled it out and felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was my license, my physical therapy certification, my doctorate, reinstated with full honors, and a formal letter of apology from the board chairman himself. How I gasped, tears blurring my vision. "This is impossible," they said. "I would never practice again." Julian leaned forward, his eyes fierce. "I have been busy while you were recovering. I hired the best legal team on the East Coast. We did not just sue Dr. Vance, we audited the entire board. I exposed every bribe, every covered-up complaint, and every corrupt connection Vance had. I told them they could either reinstate you with a public apology and wipe your record clean, or I would bankrupt them with lawsuits. Until the next century." He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek. "You are not a disgraced maid, Imani. You are the best physical therapist in the country. And you are the woman who saw what the experts missed. You have your name back." I clutched the paper to my chest, sobbing with relief and joy, looking at the boys who were now cheering for me from their chairs, and looking at the man who had fought for my honor. I realized that the nightmare was truly over. I had walked into that mansion as a servant, but I was leaving it as a healer, and for the first time in my life, I felt whole. The summer breeze that drifted through the gardens of the Thorne estate carried the scent of charcoal smoke and grilled corn, completely replacing the old suffocating smell of imported lilies and stale ambition. For the first time in living memory, the heavy iron gates at the end of the driveway were thrown wide open, not for limousines and paparazzi, but for minivans and sedans belonging to neighbors, friends, and the staff of the newly opened rehabilitation center. The lawn that had once been strictly ornamental was now covered in picnic blankets and scattered toys. The sound of a string quartet had been replaced by the chaotic, joyful playlist of three 7-year-old boys who had discovered rock and roll. I stood at the grill, flipping burgers with a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other, wearing a stained apron that said, "Kiss the cook, a gift from Ethan." I looked out over the crowd and felt a strange, unfamiliar sensation in my chest. It was lightness for years. I had carried the weight of this house, the weight of my failing marriage, and the crushing burden of my son's illness. But today the weight was gone, evaporated like the morning mist. I was not Julian Thorne, the untouchable billionaire CEO. Today I was just Julian, the dad who burned the hot dog buns across the yard. Standing under the shade of an ancient oak tree was Imani. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a genuine sound that made everyone around her smile. She was not wearing a gray maid's uniform or a catering disguise. Today, she wore a flowing yellow sundress that caught the light, making her look like the sun itself. She was holding a glass of iced tea and talking passionately to Dr. Eris and a group of therapists. She was no longer the invisible woman scrubbing floors. She was the executive director of the Second Chance Center for Pediatric Neurorecovery, a state-of-the-art facility I had built on the south grounds of the estate, fully funded by the fortune I had almost lost to Camilla. We were not just treating my sons anymore, we were treating children from all over the state. Children who had been written off by the system just like mine had been. Imani ran the place with the same fierce compassion she had shown in the nursery, and she was already being hailed as a visionary in the medical community. I watched her for a moment, just admiring the way she commanded the space. She had saved my children. But she had also saved me. She had taught me that power was not about controlling people. It was about empowering them. I caught her eye across the garden, and she winked at me. A secret shared between two soldiers who had survived the war. Suddenly the music stopped, but it was not the terrifying silence of the gala. 6 months ago, it was a hush of anticipation. Liam and Ethan, who were sitting on the grass playing with a remote-controlled car, looked up, their eyes wide with excitement. I followed their gaze and saw Noah sitting on the edge of the low stone wall near the patio. He was wearing shorts that showed off legs that were no longer thin and wasted. They were filling out, scarred from the surgeries, but strong, built by months of grueling work under Imani's guidance. Imani set her glass down on the picnic table and walked into the center of the open grass. She did not rush, she just stood there about 10 feet away from Noah and held out her hands. She did not say a word. She did not have to. The connection between them was louder than any shout. Noah took a deep breath. I saw his little chest expand. I saw his hands grip the rough stone of the wall, his knuckles turning white. The chatter of the party died down completely. The guests turned to watch, sensing that they were about to witness something holy. Noah pushed himself forward, shifting his weight onto his feet. He stood up, wobbling slightly like a foal, learning to stand. For the first time he reached for his crutches, which were leaning against the wall, but then he stopped. He looked at the crutches. Then he looked at Imani. She gave him a small, barely perceptible nod, a look that said, "You are ready." He pulled his hand back, leaving the metal supports behind. He was standing on his own, unsupported, tethered to the earth only by his own determination and the gravity he was defying. I stopped breathing, the spatula forgotten in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs. He took the first step. It was jerky and uncoordinated, his foot hitting the grass with a heavy thud, but it held. He swayed his arms, windmilling for balance, but he did not fall. He took a second step, then a third. His eyes locked on Imani, like she was the North Star guiding him home. "Come on, warrior," I whispered under my breath, tears stinging my eyes. "Come on, you can do it." The distance between them was only 10 feet, but it might as well have been 10 miles. Sweat broke out on Noah's forehead, his face twisted in a mask of supreme effort. Every muscle in his body was screaming, every nerve firing in a symphony of recovery. He took a fourth step, and then his knee buckled. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. But before he could hit the ground, he caught himself. He engaged his core, he forced the leg to straighten, and he stood tall again, a roar of triumph building in his throat. He took the final 2 steps, not with a struggle but with a lunge, throwing himself into the open space and landing squarely in Imani's waiting arms. She caught him, spinning him around as he buried his face in her neck, sobbing with relief and pride. The garden exploded into applause. Not the polite golf claps of the charity gala, but wild, raucous cheering. People were crying, hugging each other, shouting, "Noah's name!" I dropped the spatula and ran across the grass, ignoring the heat of the grill, ignoring everything but my son and the woman who had given him back to me. I reached them and wrapped my arms around both of them, lifting them up in a crush of love and gratitude. Liam and Ethan came scrambling over, abandoning their toys, grabbing onto our legs, making us a tangled knot of laughter and tears. Imani looked at me over Noah's shoulder, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We really did it." I kissed her forehead, holding her tight, knowing that I would never let go. I looked at Noah, who was wiping his eyes and grinning, a smile that was missing a front tooth, but was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "This is just the beginning," I said, looking around at the garden filled with friends at the rehabilitation center, rising in the distance, and at the family I had almost lost. "We have a lot of work to do, Director Lewis." She smiled, that brilliant, dangerous smile that had once terrified a doctor and saved a life. "Yes, we do, Mr. Thorne," she said, pulling back to look at Noah, who was already wiggling to get down so he could try again. She smoothed his hair back and whispered, "Go on. Then show them what you are made of." And as Noah turned around and took his first step back toward his brothers, walking into a future that was wide open and free, I knew that the ghosts of this house were gone forever, replaced by the unstoppable force of a second chance. The evening light was fading, turning the great lawn into a sea of emerald and gold shadows, stretching out from the ancient oak trees. Like protective arms, the air was cooling down, settling into a comfortable silence that was only broken by the distant chirping of crickets and the much closer, much sweeter sound of children laughing. Julian sat on the wide wooden steps of the back porch, a glass of iced tea, sweating in his hand, condensation dripping onto his fingers. He was not wearing a suit today. He was wearing jeans and a soft linen shirt, the uniform of a man who no longer needed to armor himself against his own life. Beside him sat Imani. She was resting her chin on her knees, watching the boys near the flower beds. She looked peaceful, her profile soft in the twilight, but Julian knew the steel that ran through her spine. He watched her for a long moment, studying the way the breeze caught the loose curls of her hair, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when Noah let out a particularly loud shriek of delight. She was the anchor that had held them all steady through the storm. Julian cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet air. He looked out at his sons Noah, Liam, and Ethan, who were currently engaged in a chaotic game of catch using a soft foam ball. They were not running yet, not really. It was more of a determined shuffle, a testament to their recovery and their stubborn refusal to give up, but they were moving, they were upright, and most importantly, they were free, you know. Julian started, his voice rough with an emotion he could not quite swallow. "I look at them and I still cannot believe it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, terrified that I am going to find them back in those beds, gray and dying. I have to walk down the hall and check their breathing just to be sure this is real." Imani turned to look at him, her eyes warm and understanding. "It is real, Julian," she said softly. "The nightmares will fade, but the reality is right there in front of you. They are getting stronger every day." Noah walked to the mailbox this morning without his crutches. Did you see that? I did. Julian smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. I saw it. I see everything now, thanks to you. He shifted on the step, turning his body fully toward her. I need you to know something, Imani, and I need you to really hear me. You did not just be their physical therapist. You did not just get my license back or clean up my company. You saved this family. You walked into a house that was full of poison and lies, and you burned it all down to save 3 little boys. You didn't even know you saved my life, Imani. I was a dead man walking before you came here. Imani shook her head slowly, a small, sad smile playing on her lips. She looked back at the boys, watching Ethan try to balance on one leg to catch a high throw. No, Julian, she said, her voice firm but gentle. I did not save you. I was just the alarm clock. You were always the father. They needed you were just sleeping. You had been drugged by grief and manipulated by fear. But the moment you woke up, the moment you actually saw what was happening, you were the one who tore the door down. You were the one who fought for them. I just woke you up. Julian looked at her, humbled by her grace. He reached out and covered her hand with his, squeezing it gently. Maybe, he said, but I would have slept through the end of the world if you had not been there to shake me. Hey, Dad! Hey, Imani! The shout came from the garden, interrupting the moment. Noah was waving his arm frantically, beckoning them over. Come here, we want to take a picture. Julian and Imani exchanged a look, a silent agreement passing between them, and they stood up, walking across the soft grass toward the boys. The sun was just dipping below the tree line, casting a magical halo of light around the garden as they approached. The boys started to organize themselves. Wait, Liam said, pushing his wheelchair away. I do not want the chair in the picture. Me neither, Ethan agreed, kicking his chair back a few feet. We stand up. We stand up like soldiers. Julian felt a lump form in his throat. He moved to help them, but Imani put a hand on his arm, stopping him. Say, them, she whispered. Let them do this. He watched as his 3 sons braced themselves against each other. They were a tripod of support. Noah grabbed Liam's shoulder. Ethan wrapped an arm around Noah's waist. They grunted with effort, their legs trembling slightly as they locked their knees, fighting the gravity that had been their enemy for so long. There was no magic cure here, just months of sweat and tears and the undeniable power of their bond. One by one, they straightened up. They were not perfect. Their posture was a little crooked, and they swayed like saplings in the wind. But they were standing. They were standing on their own feet, tall and proud and defiant. Okay, Dad, take it, quick before we fall. Noah laughed, his face flushed with exertion and pure joy. Julian pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking slightly. He framed the shot. The 3 of them standing there, with the golden sunset behind them, grinning like the kings of the world. Imani stepped in behind them, placing her hands on their shoulders, not to hold them up, but to stand with them. A guardian angel, who had finally earned her wings. Say victory! Julian called out, his voice thick with tears. Victory! The boys screamed in unison, their voices ringing out clear and strong, echoing off the walls of the house that was no longer a prison. Julian pressed the button, capturing the moment forever. The image froze on the screen. 3 brothers standing tall, a woman who had become their mother in every way that mattered, and a future that was wide open and bright. He lowered the phone and looked at them with his own eyes, etching the scene into his heart. This was not just a happy ending, it was a new beginning. And as the first star appeared in the evening sky, Julian knew that finally everything was exactly as it was meant to be. The most profound lesson we can take from the story of Julian and Imani is that true sight has nothing to do with eyes and everything to do with the heart. Julian was a man who had everything the world tells us to want. He had a massive fortune, a sprawling estate, and the best doctors money could buy, yet he was completely blind to the reality. Rotting his home from the inside out, He mistook a gilded cage for a sanctuary, and he mistook a predator for a partner because he was too afraid to look past the surface. His story serves as a chilling warning about the dangers of complacency and the high cost of outsourcing our responsibilities to others. He thought writing checks was the same as being present, and that mistake almost cost him the lives of his children. On the other side of the spectrum stands Imani, who teaches us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear silence you. She possessed none of Julian's power or influence. She was a woman stripped of her credentials and forced to work in the shadows. Yet she saw what the billionaire could not. She reminds us that intuition is a superpower, and that we must trust that quiet voice inside us that says something is wrong even when the experts tell us everything is fine. She proves that you do not need a title to be a leader, and you do not need permission to be a hero, you just need to be awake. This narrative ultimately challenges us to examine our own lives and ask where we might be asleep at the wheel. Are we tolerating toxic situations because they are familiar? Are we trusting the wrong people simply because it is easier than confronting the truth? The redemption of the Thorne family shows us that it is never too late to wake up. Julian lost years with his sons, but he did not lose them forever because he finally chose to act. It is a testament to the fact that while we cannot change the past, we have absolute power over the future if we are willing to fight for it. Love is not passive. It is an active, fierce, and sometimes violent force that demands we stand up and protect what is ours. If this story inspired you to trust your gut and fight for the people you love, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart and wake up the soul.